Games olarak düzenlediğimiz NexGenDev'e hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Ayda 2 kere düzenli olarak yapacağımız etkinliğimizi ilk olarak sosyal medya hesaplarımızdan takip ederek zamanını öğrenebilirsiniz. Bunun yanı sıra UDO Games olarak genç yeteneklere de yer açtığımız bir staj programı düzenliyoruz. NexGenDev staj programı ile farklı konularda arkadaşlara eğitim verip onların kendi oyunlarını yapma imkanı tanıyoruz. Bu staj programının da son katılım tarihi 21 Haziran. Yine buradan hepinize bunu söylemek istedik. Bunun dışında bugünkü etkinliğimize gelecek olursak eğer, etkinliğimizin ilk bölümü hızlı prototipleştirme teknikleri ve püf noktaları ile ilgili olacak. Ve bunun içinde 2 tane konuğumuz var. Biri Bora İlkönü, diğeri de Ian Snyder. Welcome to Next Generation Developers Game Forum. Today we are talking about rapid prototyping tips and techniques. And we have here Ian Snyder and Bora İlkönü. And let's know them. Bora.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to the next Generation Developers. I hope you are all doing fine where you are joining us. Today we have my dear friend and also a great mentor, Ian Snyder. I would like to give a brief info about the flow of events. Actually, our speaker will have a presentation or demo for about 40 or 50 minutes. Then we will have a short Q&A for 10 minutes or so. We will try not to exceed 60 minutes as like overall time for this. Yeah. Alright then, I want to leave the floor to our guest. Could you please introduce yourself with a brief overview of your career? Then we can move on to your presentation.
Yeah, sure. Hi everybody, I'm Ian Snyder. I have been developing video games for fun since I guess I was about 10, and my brother and I were working on very old computers making like text-based adventure games, and but I've been working professionally in the game industry for about 15 years. I now teach full-time, but I still develop games in my free time as well. I don't know, can everybody see my screen yet, or? Yeah. Okay, cool. So we're going to be talking about rapid prototyping, but I'm also going to be sharing the link to this presentation, so you can follow the links yourself. But I do have a link to my LinkedIn, so if you do want to see some more of the things that I've worked on, but basically I've worked as a 3D artist, game designer, and a senior game designer professionally, and but I've been teaching for the past 4 years or so, and but in my free time I also develop games. I just fairly recently released a game called Skycadia that's on Steam and Xbox, and I'm working on the Switch version of that right now. So I'm also a Unity certified instructor. I've been teaching for Unity for about 2.5 years now, and I'm actually the Unity trainer for North America, so I do a lot of training for Unity. Yeah, so that's kind of quick overview of my background so that we can get into the prototyping. So should I just go ahead and jump straight into it then?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, okay, great. So yeah, today we'll just be talking about rapid prototyping and kind of what is that and why should you do it. Rapid prototyping is something that it's not just specific to games. It could be for software or just even physical prototyping, things like that. And really the idea with rapid prototyping is to get a playable prototype of something as quickly as possible. I'm going to be obviously focused on the game side of things, but this could be for applications, VR, AR, all sorts of stuff like that. So usually what I kind of recommend to people is just to really focus on clear deliverables. So something like a tangible result of what you're doing is kind of the main thing, and breaking those into manageable steps. So
just kind of depending on what the project is, that can look like a lot of different things, and we'll kind of talk about some concrete examples of that. So that could be anywhere from you're starting from scratch on a new game idea, and you want to find the fun of that game as quickly as possible and see if it's an idea worth developing. It could be that you're coming into a project that has been in development for some time but needs to be focused for release. So there's a lot of different situations that you may come into where rapid prototyping is going to be really helpful. Yeah. So, and if you're involved with the coding side of the prototype development, I always like to tell people, assume that the code may be thrown out. So don't worry so much about clean code structure and things like that. You should make it work, but not worry too much about it. So kind of the core idea behind rapid prototyping is using the iterative design process. And again, you could use this in a lot of different industries. And the idea is to do your initial planning, come up with some ideas, formalize those ideas. So that would be, potentially programming it or just writing out ideas. And again, we'll talk about some more concrete examples in just a minute here. Test those ideas out. And then when you're evaluating those results, you see, is this working or not? And whether it's working or not, you can keep going through this process and hopefully refining the idea further and further until you get to a point where this is the result that we want and we're done. So that's kind of the main idea. And I just wanted to mention that an important part of iterative design is being flexible about the development of whatever you're working on. So like trying not to write down rules until you have to. So whether that's game rules or specific code and things like that, kind of trying to keep things flexible as long as possible. And then don't Band-Aid and leave problems in. So this is really important and kind of surprising how often this doesn't happen. But basically, a lot of times people will come up with an idea that sounds good on paper. They really like the idea and you implement it and it's just not fun. And instead of saying, well, maybe we need to cut this feature, they just want to keep adding what we call Band-Aids to it to maybe if we do this, and maybe if we do this, and maybe if we do this, it'll make it more fun. And sometimes it's better to rip the Band-Aid off and say, this feature just isn't working, so we're going to strip it out. And sometimes that could even be realizing that the core idea for a game is not really that fun. Hopefully, usually that doesn't happen too often, but it.
I think Ian just.
Sorry about that. I think I just dropped out for a second.
Yeah, okay. He's back.
It wouldn't be an online thing without some technical difficulties, I think.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, is that all good again? Sorry. Over the past year, I've at least gotten good at getting back on quickly. Okay, yeah. So this first example I'm going to show is an actual case study that I can't go into too many specifics, but I'm going to be able to show some actual video of the prototype I developed. And so this is a situation where I was hired on at a studio, and basically kind of right away I found out the project we're working on has been having a lot of troubles, and we really need you to help us out with what should we do with it. And so I was walking into a situation where there were already a lot of people working on a project. A lot of artwork had already been done, and a lot of game design had already been done, but a lot of work had already been done, but they were just finding the game does not feel fun. And so what I did was I played the game quite a bit, what they had, and I actually initially created a super rapid prototype, which basically what I did was I took the main combat gameplay of the game and I tried to break it down into a simple card game. And actually, even people on the design team, I think they thought it was kind of like a cute, oh, that's cute, you're making a little card game out of it. And it's like, this is kind of the fundamentals of how you actually break down the problem, going through and analyzing what do we have here, and what can be stripped out so we can focus on what are the actual fun parts of this. Because I think everybody felt like there's fun stuff in it, but there's also not fun stuff. And you know, in this situation, it was kind of my first job was to strip out what's working and what's not working. And so I created this paper prototype that was a very simple card game. I just drew it out on index cards. I used colored pencils and everything. I like to have fun with the process, and it does help when you're playtesting with other people to have quick ways of reading. Okay, using the colored pencils, I would indicate, is this an offensive, like an attacking skill, or is this a defensive skill, or is this a special skill that causes some special effect? And again, though, these cards that I would make, they were, you know, it was like a quarter size of an index card. I just tried to keep it as simple as possible. And I kind of used that to strip down to what are the most important skills that we're using in the game? How do we balance the cost of using those skills, and kind of move from there? And so once I had gotten a rough idea of that, and you know, again, with a paper prototype like that, you can very quickly iterate on, okay, these skills are basically worthless right now. Is there some way to make them worth using, or do we just throw them out? And then once I had a good idea of that, then I jumped into creating a digital prototype in Unity. So this is where I can start showing. This is a video of the very first prototype. Now, this is still actually more advanced than what I would normally do for a prototype, because I had some art assets and some animations to use. So I'll just go ahead and play that video real quick. I think. Yeah, oh yeah, it's paused at the very beginning here. And I just did some very simple, this is basically turn-based combat, where I took what I had prototyped with the card, like the paper card game, and started translating that into making it's a semi-real-time, semi-turn-based combat game here. And you can see what I was focusing on was making sure everything's very readable so that the player understands what type of attacks are happening, when things are happening. And this video is actually taken from a playable version in Unity that this was recorded off of a computer where I was just using a mouse, but I was able to build this to Android very easily so that various stakeholders at the company could actually play it and see what does this actually feel like playing on device. And I will actually, I think I should just be able to set this to repeat real quick. So I'll just have that playing for a minute, and then I'll move on to the next iteration of the prototype. And you can see that it's pretty difficult still to see everything that's going on. This was part of the idea with this prototype was this is a simplified version of what was actually happening in the game already, and I'm trying to refine how do we make it clear to players what's going on while everything is going on in real time. How do we message those things to players just visually, and especially this was planned to be a mobile game, so we may not have audio on. We have to assume that players may not have their audio on, so it's primarily visual. Yeah, and then also part of this was the prototype was set up so that I could easily swap out different abilities, change the amount of damage that abilities do, or the amount of time an ability takes, things like that. And so this was kind of our first prototype that I was able to show to people at the studio, and they were able to say, okay, this is actually kind of an interesting direction to start pushing, so why don't we start refining this? So I'll move on to our next video. So this has a little bit more refined models going on. We've started adding some more icons. Again, I was lucky. A lot of these icons, some of these icons that I'm using, though, were just from free icon packs on the internet, things like that. I think these were from a free asset store UI package. And then I was also using some of the icons that were actually built into the game that we had developed already. You can see again that I've refined some of the visual effects a little bit to start making it look a little bit nicer. And not just to make it look nicer, but to hopefully start clarifying what's going on in the scene, and to clarify what this is going to start looking like in the actual full game. And then our final mock-up that I have here that I'll show. This is where now when you start, you're actually able to choose what characters. Now, up to this point, like choosing characters and everything was just done through the editor in Unity. Again, just as a rapid prototype, I would just drag and drop in different prefabs. Finally, I spent some time actually creating this menu, main menu, where you could choose what are the characters that I'm using on both the attacking team, which is just down here at the bottom, and the defending team up here at the top. You could select them. I just made the buttons bigger to show that you selected those, and you start. I just used a heart for fun. And then I had to do some stuff just for fun. And we could see, visually, this has not changed much. We added in a little bit of camera movement, still playing around maybe with some of the colors on some of the effects and stuff like that. I believe I added a few new icons and things like that as well. But at this point, it was primarily about balancing the gameplay to start feeling more fun. And we knew at this stage that we were getting closer to this prototype has served its purpose, so now we're going to start implementing the gameplay from this prototype into the full project, where now the real programmers are going to be integrating this and everything like that. So, so yeah, this is just kind of like a real world situation of going from we have a game that's not really working from a gameplay standpoint. It looked nice and had a lot of assets already created and everything, but it just wasn't super fun. And so that was kind of the situation I was put into, where I needed to create a rapid prototype to address that situation. You know, a lot of other, like I mentioned before, a lot of the time though, you'll have a situation where you need to create a rapid prototype just to prove out the idea of what you want to be working on. And in that situation, in some ways that can be almost more difficult, because you have so much flexibility about what do we want to be doing with this project. Sometimes the constraints, like the constraint of the project I was on here, was kind of nice, because I knew there's all these things that are set that I have to work within. So then how do I make it fun within those constraints? If things are too open, like at the beginning of a project, that's where you have the trouble of how do you pin down what is it that we're even really wanting to make here? And so that's where it can be really helpful, just having some planning documents and things like that I will be sharing with everybody. So I'll kind of move on from there. And yeah, depending on how much time we have, I've got plenty of other stories to talk about too. For the most part, what I kind of recommend to people, like especially for the game industry, if you would like to get good at doing rapid prototypes, really your best bet is participating in game jams. And so here, this is just, I took a screenshot of the calendar of game jams that are going on right now on itch.io. Itch.io has a great calendar of game jams. There's several others. If you just do a search for game jam calendar on Google, you're going to find a bunch of results. And I just really encourage people not to be afraid of jumping into a game jam, whether you even if you have just zero game development experience and you don't know what you're doing at all. You know, that could be a little difficult. Usually helps if you have some sort of a focus. But, you know, a lot of times people are working in teams where they have a programmer, but they don't have an artist, or they have an artist and a programmer, but they don't have a musician.
Yeah, unfortunately, Ian just dropped off the live streaming.
Yeah, sorry about that. It keeps dropping.
Yeah, okay, that's
Something
great.
wrong with my internet. It's of course what I apologize for that.
Yeah, no problem.
But yeah, game jams are just kind of an excellent way to refine your rapid prototyping skills. If you check out my LinkedIn, you can see one of the things I'm pretty proud of. This, but it's a long time ago. I don't want to say how long ago it was. I think it was 8 years ago or something, like probably 9 years ago now or something. While I was working at Gameloft, there was a Battle of the Studios game jam where during the Montreal Independent Games Conference, something it's called MIGS, but this is a big event where there were, thousands of people milling around, and we actually were on a live show floor with our backs to everybody just walking around, and we had 7 hours to make a game in Unity, and we
7
had
hours. Just 7 hours.
7 hours.
That's good.
And so we were given art assets we were allowed to use if we wanted to use them by Autodesk, and we didn't know what the theme would be going into it, but basically each studio that participated was allowed to send 2 participants. And so it could be game designers or programmers or whoever they wanted to send. And so from Gameloft, it was me and another game designer. And we planned out a little bit of, hey, we think we have some interesting mechanics that we might want to do, where we had planned out the other game designer, his name is Mark, he had been playing around with things in Unity where he would record what a player was doing and play it back to create looping gameplay. And I have a lot of experience with art and level design, and so we had a basic idea of that will probably be something interesting to do, and then when it got started, they announced that the theme would be doors, and so we used that to say, okay, you use these teleportation doors to teleport into tower defense. It was basically a tower defense where you would teleport up into the tower, and it was a first-person shooter where you would shoot where you want the tower to shoot, and then you could leave the tower, and the tower would continue doing whatever pattern you did. And so it was kind of like a tower defense in first person where it remembered how you shot it. So it's kind of like you're programming where it shot. And yeah, it ended up being actually really fun, and we did a little bit of polish to make it look nice, and ended up winning that competition, and I was kind of proud because, we were the little guys from Gameloft, and there was studios like Square Enix were there, and a couple of indie developers and things like that, and we won that, so that was kind of cool. But just that, you can go into even a rapid prototype with some planning in the back of your head about what are some of my strengths that I could bring to this, and so that I could execute something quickly that works well. Actually, I'll see if I can add the link up here after this, but this is about 3 years ago. 2 of my former students and I worked on a game jam with there were about 250 participants in that, and we made it in the top 10 for that one with a game called Abyss. And it was the same type of thing where I think we had 7 days for that one, and we kind of went in saying, okay, what's a fast, quick way to get some sort of a prototype going? And I always like starting off with kind of an asteroids type of prototype. I feel like with asteroids, the top down, flying around, controlling something with physics, it's a really fun base, because just by changing the visuals on it, you can make it feel like a top-down racing game or something like the original Grand Theft Auto games. You can make it into a space shooter. You can make it into all sorts of stuff. And so with our game, we put kind of this deep sea aesthetic to it. So you were a dog in a space suit in the deep sea with a bunch of deep sea fish trying to eat you, basically, and just added some simple mechanics to that. And it was the type of thing where I don't think that the gameplay we made was anything revolutionary, but it felt fun and mixed with the art style and the aesthetic that my former students were able to produce and the music that we made. It ended up coming together as a really nice, cohesive whole. And I think that's kind of the whole idea for me behind rapid prototyping, is that you really don't know what something's going to feel like playing, or even outside of games, just even interacting with an app or anything like that. You don't really know what it's going to feel like until you actually develop it. And so the faster that you have something to interact with there, the faster you're going to see what's working and what's not working. So yeah, game jams are great. So this link that I have right here is a link to design templates that I'm sharing with everybody here. It's actually just a link to a Google Drive folder that everybody can take a look at. And basically I have design document templates and then examples, and these are actual examples from pitches and game designs that I've worked on. And so these can be really helpful for if you're doing a rapid prototype, just to kind of nail down, well, what am I trying to shoot for here? Now, these are more designed for if you're just starting a project from the beginning, but it could be if you're on a project that's in trouble, making sure that you're answering some of these important, that it's not a multiplayer game. You know, what makes it unique, but also what makes it familiar. No matter what anybody says, if a game is too unique, it turns into an art game that is interesting, but probably not a lot of people are actually going to pay you money for it. So keeping some things familiar is always helpful. Yeah, just going into what is the actual genre that we're shooting for here? What platforms are is it designed for? So is this going to be played in a web browser versus, and this is even just for a game jam game. It's important to think about, is this going to be like, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yes, I will be actually, yeah, I'm going to share this entire presentation. If that's okay, I'm going to do it at the very end. I just didn't get to share the link yet. So I will be sharing this, so all of these links you'll be able to access. So yeah, don't worry, this isn't just for me. So and I'll create a bit.ly link as well. I meant to do that. I'll get that done too, just so that you can access it easily afterwards as well. So yeah, so that's why I'm hoping these kind of more concrete examples will be something that you'll be able to use later. And then maybe just some concept art, which could, concept art could even just be taking some like sample screenshots from other games to say this is kind of the general idea of what we're going for, or maybe modifying screenshots from other games like with Photoshop. So as a quick example then, I'll open up the fantasy bout concept, and this is a concept sheet that I created. This was kind of the idea for this would be to make, and this is what the concept art is for. I can just go show you, this is the idea behind it. I'm using screenshots from a game called Battle Fantasia, but just thinking about making a kind of medieval fantasy themed Punch-Out game for iPhone. And this is from probably like 10 years ago. So this was more unique back then. So but the idea with this concept sheet is just to give you a quick idea of what this game is going to feel like, what are some of those key features, and not really going into too much depth. After that, we would say, okay, if we're interested in this idea, we would go into the pitch document and then the design document. So the pitch is kind of a more fleshed out concept document. So I'll go ahead and just show, this is for a different game that I pitched called Woodland Creatures, that is basically Animal Crossing with some more RPG elements. So this goes into a bit more depth, having a concept overview, the game structure, some fake screenshots, the accessibility and difficulty of the game. Who is this really targeting? how control mapping will work. So again, that goes back to what platforms are we targeting? Are we doing touchscreen inputs? Are we doing controller inputs, mouse and keyboard, things like that? What are the production values? Are we planning on trying to make this AAA or anything like that? Timescale, and then competitors and reference review. So I'll just quickly go over. I'm not going to read through all this, but very quick concept overview here. The game structure, right away, I'm showing some screenshots of Animal Crossing. The idea is something similar to Animal Crossing, but maybe with some more potentially like I don't.
Yeah, another unfortunate drop off. I hope Ian will be back.
I'm so sorry. It's like, just get used to it. I'm sorry. I don't know. I'm going to go yell at my internet provider. So I don't know. I'm not sure if it's Discord. I'll have to check out what's going on with that. But okay. So anyway, I'm just kind of going over here. So here's some fake screenshots. This is where like those fake screenshots or concept images can help a lot. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It will just give people an idea. These are, pretty basic sketches that I just colored a little bit just to give people an idea of, okay, it's kind of Animal Crossing, but, maybe just kind of a different vibe to it. And again, this was way back in the olden days on iPhone. There really wasn't anything like Animal Crossing like this directly. Accessibility and difficulty, our control mapping. So, and this didn't go into any type of detail. I'll show more advanced with that on our design document, but this is just saying it's going to be controlled with the touch screen and with a couple of simple examples. Some ideas of the characters and the setting, stuff like that. And again, you can look more in depth with this. And this is something that's really easy to overlook, but even a brief overview of competitors. What other games are out there, and essentially, why are we making this game when there's these other competitors out there? What are we doing that they're not doing? So, there's the pitch document, and then finally we have this design template, which I'll just show the fantasy about design just as an example, and this is where we start going much more in depth, fleshing out core gameplay. Characters that would be involved, and this one I'm getting less and less worried about selling this idea to you. This is at the stage where we're probably really seriously thinking about developing this. So now I'm wanting to write out more ideas. I could include more images, but gameplay elements like abilities, special moves, items. How will artificial intelligence work? Is multiplayer even being considered? And this is where I have some mock-ups of how are the in-game controls. So this is where I go into depth about how control mapping is going to work. So in this situation, what the touch inputs are going to look like. Overall art goals. What is the user interface or the GUI? It's the graphical user interface going to look like. Music, setting, and everything like that. Some level descriptions, and then overview of what are menus going to look like. And that sounds like, well, I mean, why do you need to worry about menus yet? It will really give an idea of, as a game designer, what am I planning as the flow of a player going into the game, and what's going to be required. Now, again, this doesn't have to be very in-depth, but just an idea of how menu heavy this game is going to be. So all of these examples that I have are set up as PDFs, but then I have the templates set up so that you can go in and make copies of these and modify them as you want to. So I've kind of given a brief overview of what each section is for, but otherwise you can just make copies of these on Google Drive and modify those. So hopefully that'll be helpful to people. Whoops. So, hey, I'm actually doing okay on time. Okay. So, for some further information on all of this, I really recommend checking out Derek Yu has an article called Finishing a Game. Derek Yu is a well-known indie game developer. He developed Spelunky and quite a few other games as well. If my internet's going to load it up here. Anyway, we'll see if that ends up loading. I'll switch back to it. But this is a really good article on. Okay, or I may have broken the link. I may have to double check that link. But if you just do a search for Derek Yu finishing a game on Google, that should come up. Whoops. So that's just a really great article in general about how to actually finish a game. But a lot of the concepts he's talking about kind of directly apply to rapid prototyping, especially when you're working on your own or in a small team. How do you focus on things to actually get things done? I also like linking to Crafting a Tiny Open World, a Short Hike Postmortem. This is just a 30-minute postmortem from the Game Developers Conference from the developer of A Short Hike, where he just talks about how he planned on making A Short Hike in about 3 months, I want to say. I think he ended up making it in 6 months, but it's, again, just a really great example of having a little bit of planning at the beginning. You can really turn out something really high quality quickly this way. And he obviously has a lot of previous experience too, so you can never really get around that. And that's where I would say kind of goes back to participating in game jams is an excellent way to get development experience. For people that like books, I do have some books that I recommend. The main book I recommend to people is actually this book called Challenges for Game Designers, and it's not a digital prototyping book. It's actually for doing physical game prototyping. So this is exactly the type of techniques that I used when I was first developing that paper prototype on the game I was working on at the studio I was talking about before, where you can really focus on just the game design aspect without getting wrapped up in technical challenges before you jump into all the technical challenges. So I really highly recommend Challenges for Game Designers. And then the other three, A Theory of Fun, The Art of Game Design, and Game Design Workshop. These are kind of very well-known game design books. They're highly recommended. So if you want to go more in depth just in game design in general, recommend that. But kind of bringing this back to the rapid prototyping, the Challenges for Game Designers kind of forces you to start thinking in the right mindset for doing rapid prototyping, where how can I get this idea across as quickly as possible? So that's why I really recommend that. So thank you. That's my note to myself to know that I got to the end of this.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So actually, I will hop over to the questions here and see if we have any questions. So, cool. Yeah, I don't know. Has anybody sent in any questions? I'm sorry, they're in Turkish, so I can't read Turkish.
Hey, Ian,
so.
I can actually ask a question if you don't
Sure.
mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I'm gonna have to leave in about 20 minutes, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna just a real quick question. So you said in the first place, you said you broke down something to create something else, something unique. So that's actually pretty impressive, being able to create something and breaking down to create something else, something unique. So can you give us any advice? How can we approach that? How can we actually create something from breaking down something else? I
Well,
think that's really impressive.
Right. And the thing is actually thank you for the question. That's a great question because that's kind of frequently how I'll start with a game is that I like some game, but I'm like, I am one person and I don't have a 100-person studio to develop this. So how can I take a game? How can I take a game that I like and break down what are those elements that are crucial to that experience? So, I mean, just as a quick example off the top of my head, like I played Shadow of Mordor when that came out and really enjoyed that. And yeah, it's awesome. There's a million things that I'll never be able to do on my own as an indie developer. But there's a lot of things that I could do as an indie developer. obviously the Nemesis system, which is such a core to the experience of that. And that's where it's important to think as a game designer, where that doesn't mean I like the Nemesis system, so I'm going to go copy the Nemesis system, which, by the way, you can't do anymore. By the way, I think they finally were able to patent the Nemesis system, which is pretty shocking. But
yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of that system, but yeah, I mean, it was cool. So
But-
you say it
oh yeah,
also-
go ahead.
Yeah, it all comes down to this being able to decide what can I do with a, let's say, 5-person or 6 after we're not a AAA studio. So it all comes down to identifying what you can achieve and then designing according to that.
Yeah, that's what I wasn't sure. I didn't want to go too all over the place with this, but I always like including this image of, it's just a common management image that people use.
Yeah.
It's a triangle where you're trying to balance. Anytime you're working on a project, you've got quality, cost, and time.
Yeah.
You're never going to have all three of those things. Usually you may have a lot of money, but you don't have a lot of time. But so like you have a lot of money, you need high quality, but you don't have a lot of time. So you're going to have to spend a lot of money. Something's got to give, basically. There's always a push and pull between your time, quality, and resources, essentially, money or resources. And from the time perspective, that's where it's important to know, I think for a lot of new developers especially, it's difficult to gauge how much work can I expect a person to actually get done. And I think that's a huge part of it, is trying to break down, I see the project that we need to do. We have 6 months to do it, and we have 3 people. Well, if they're working full time, I've got 6 times 40 hours a week to get this done in, essentially. And I think that really breaking that down analytically like that, by the way, I haven't mentioned, I have a mathematics degree. That's my background. So and not that everybody needs a math degree, but just the breaking things down.
Math myself.
But the thing is, it's not necessarily about just solving equations. I would say what's helpful about that is the breaking things down into their logical steps. Okay, I need to develop, let's say I need to develop a game, but I have 3 people, and they're only going to be able to work on it, say we're working part-time in our spare time.
No.
Okay. I think Ian will be back before I finish my sentence.
Oh, he's back already, isn't he?
I'm so sorry about that. Geez, let's just
Welcome back.
I'm going to disconnect like 5 times during this, by the way.
You got used to it.
Yeah. So, basically being able to say, okay, I know that I have 10 hours a week per person. So total, we're getting 30 hours a week on this project with 3 people working on it. You have to think then realistically, this is like one person working less than full time each week on it, and just being able to wrap your head around some concrete planning like that can help a lot with making sure that you're scoping your project well. It was kind of hard when I was planning this talk a little bit to not go too far into, so much of rapid prototyping depends on what is the project that you're planning for, and then you're going into project management stuff, which is super important, and
Yeah,
an entire
it's a whole different level, right?
right.
And whatnot. Yeah.
And so, the thing is too, I actually was planning on talking more about how I use Unity for rapid prototyping, and I didn't even go into any technical details yet. This is all just how you mentally need to prepare for rapid prototyping. And so, there is a lot of technical side that goes into it as well, but I guess just to go back to the question of how do you take something that's existing and kind of break it down into those core components? That's where I would say maybe going back to my example of the Nemesis system, where it's not enough to just say, I really like the Nemesis system, so I want to copy it. You want to look at what is it about the Nemesis system that is, when I'm playing, what is it about that that's making me get enjoyment out of it? At what points is that happening? Because the Nemesis system may be way more complex than what you need to get the results that you're looking for. And so I can strip it back and say, what I really like is when it's actually when I get killed by an enemy and I know who that enemy is, so that I can, and then they're pointed out to me on the map afterwards.
You can get revenge and whatnot.
Right. And so I may be able to really simplify that system, and instead of making them all visually unique and have unique audio and everything, I don't have the resources for that, but maybe even giving them a little randomly generated 2-line description is enough to elicit that same feeling for my own project, for example. So, that's just kind of a quick example of that. But again, I maybe I love racing games. I've worked on a lot of racing games. What is it specifically about racing games? Do I need to make a game that has licensed cars and everything like that? And that's a huge reason some people play racing games. They love seeing the licensed cars, getting that kind of feeling of getting to drive a Lamborghini or something. But for a lot of people, it may come down to that feeling of mastering control of drifting or things like that. And so that's where you can see there's a recent indie game. Well, recent to me is, I think it's about a year old now, but it's called, I think it's called Art of Rally. Is that it? I'm probably misremembering right now.
Never heard of it, but yeah.
I think it's been doing pretty well. It's on Steam, and it's just entirely focused on getting a really clean rally experience.
Oh yeah, some people even buy controllers, to just feel that steering
Right,
wheels
exactly.
and whatnot. Yeah.
And so that's where you can kind of just really focus on how do I drill down to what's most important from this, and then so bringing it back to the rapid prototyping, that's the first thing I need to prototype. That's the first thing I need to implement to get that part playable, so that we can start testing that out and see, okay, this is fun. Now we can start adding on other pieces that contribute to that. And if they're not contributing to that, then those are features that we should just lay off to the side. So,
Got you. So taking something nice, something feels nice, and then combining it with different elements that you've found also nice from maybe different games, and then creating something unique.
And that's part of that iterative process we were talking about earlier, where you may find that you get it to a point where it feels really fun, and then you add something that you think is going to add a lot of fun to it because you liked it in another game, but it doesn't happen to work well with this current game. You have to be ready to say, that didn't actually add, and rather than me trying to band-aid it and force it to work, I'm going to throw away that piece that I just spent a little bit of time on because I'm doing it quickly, and go back to, okay, this is fun. Does it even need extra stuff added? Or
Yeah, you're not going to lose much. So you only
Right.
work like 2 hours or something. You can just throw it away.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. It would be pity if you worked on 2 weeks or something, but yeah.
Well, 2 weeks still isn't too bad. It's when you've been working on something for a year and you realize this isn't very fun.
Well, isn't that a AAA scale or something for you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, one day I hope I will get to that point. So
You will,
thank
you
so
will.
much.
Can I
Thank
add
you,
something
thank
to
you.
the question?
Yeah, absolutely.
What if you can't drill down the requirements? For example, if your game must have a network component, you have to make the middleware, and it will take a lot of time. What do you suggest in that scenario? For example, if the game has network components, shall we make the prototypes in single player, then trash the code base and start from scratch?
Well, I mean, the thing is, I would say depends on how complex it needs to be. Now, obviously, like if you're talking about just like an MMO, like a massively multiplayer online game, yeah, it's difficult to prototype that. That's why we see, you know, dozens, if not hundreds, of failed MMOs because it's very difficult to know how MMO gameplay is going to scale. But, you know, depending on the type of game, so let's say, for example, if you are making a massive, I mean, like a big multiplayer game that has a network component, but it is meant to be kind of multiplayer asynchronous, for example. That's a lot easier to fake that multiplayer asynchronous type of gameplay using AI so that you could test to make sure that your core mechanics of your game, like how players are interacting with each other, is actually fun. And actually, again, this is going to go back to, I still recommend the paper prototyping for even projects like that, where you should be able to quickly tell, are the interactions that we've set up between players interesting and engaging? That's kind of the core of how a multiplayer game is going to flourish, is if you've created interesting interactions between players. And that can be all over the place. That could be from Counter-Strike, where it's all about comparing your skill directly one-on-one with other players, all the way to the Animal Crossing mobile game or Pokemon Go or something like that, where it's a totally different type of gameplay, but it's still critical to consider how players are getting to either show off the items that they've gotten, interact and communicate with each other without allowing toxic behavior. And, you know, and I'm not saying you're not going to be able to do literally all of that with just like a paper prototype, but you will be able to test pretty much every major component of how that should work. And then, you know, you can also get a good start on how those components should be balanced. So even, again, for example, with Animal Crossing, what types of items do players find valuable? And so that you get an idea of how you're going to start balancing the game economy. Okay, now, and then going back to the networking example, if it's totally critical that you do a networked thing, you know, in Unity, go get you know, if you're working on a larger project, spend even a couple $100 on stuff from the asset store that's going to let you knock out a prototype where you could test with maybe 50 to 100 people. Get you know, test users playing some sort of a prototype of the game internally, understanding that the graphics and visuals and everything are not going to be there, but we want to be focusing on the interactions between the players and everything. And yeah, all of that stuff potentially is going to get thrown out because it may not be how you actually want to integrate the back end of your servers and stuff like that. But if I'm able to use some stuff from the asset store to get something functioning within a month, and I'm saving months of development time for 10 developers, that's saving you potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, at least, you know, in the US, where, I mean, a programmer is easily going to be paid over $100,000 a year. So, I mean, you're talking about, you will be able to show, hey, if we prototype this, it's going to be worth us spending $500 on stuff from the asset store, even though we're not really planning on putting any of that directly into the game. This is an investment so that we can make sure that our game doesn't stink before we put a bunch of development time into it. So,
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Ian. Our time.
Thank you.
Therefore, we can't take any more questions about that. It was a great pleasure to have you today. Actually, this was a powerful session. There are lots to consider about fast prototyping issues. Actually, there are certain lessons to get from your presentation and your kind answers to our questions. Actually, I would like to also thank everybody. See you next week. Hopefully, please stay tuned. We will make the announcement of the next event in a couple of days. Please take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. Oh, and I will share that link in the Discord server as well. So,
All right, that's great. Thank you very much, Ian. Bye-bye.
bye, everybody.
Thank you again.
Thank you.